We're back on You Fantasy Football. Today I want to go over some tips and strategy and just general things to be aware of um, in the preseason and during the fantasy football season. One is you have to know that only one of 12 teams can win. Um, so you're not going to win the championship every year. Nobody does. Not the experts. Not the fantasysharks.com, not footballguys.com. Nobody wins every year. So, I mean, you can't expect to always win. But what you should be going for is consistency, and that you're consistently up at the top of the standings and with the winning record. Your job as the fantasy owner is to get your team into the playoffs. Stuff happens during the season that you can't. I mean, there's nothing you can do, and what you want to do is put yourself in a position to where you're in the playoffs, and in the playoffs, it's usually sudden death, so anything can happen. Any group of collective players can come together and get you that win. Um, Teams are resting their starters, or they're taking it easy, trying to rest for the playoffs, or teams have nothing to play for, etc. So stuff happens in the playoffs. Unlikely heroes end up carrying fantasy wins, and fantasy studs disappear. So your job is to get to the playoffs, and once you're in the playoffs, you at least set yourself up to be in the position to win the championship. I think a good tip here is to grab a great defensive matchup for the playoffs earlier in the season. Now, Sage owners will look for this. Not everybody does, but they people usually start catching around mid-season. They start trying to trade for these matchups. But you want a good defensive team going up against a weak offensive team. Teams that cough up the ball a lot, that have a lot of trouble holding on to it. Their quarterbacks give up interceptions. Um, Maybe they're beaten up. Whatever the case, I have three teams listed here: the Lions, the Dolphins, and the Raiders. And that's because one, John Kitna constantly throws interceptions. Two, the Dolphins really don't have a strong quarterback. They have Josh McCown and John Beck, um, who just aren't solid quarterbacks, and they don't have good receivers to go with them anyway. And then the Raiders, I think they could be a good offense, but I think Jamarcus Russell's going to have some growing pains, so he's still going to be struggling, I think, this season. And then also a team I didn't even put down is, of course, the Bears. The Bears are horrible. You definitely want to have a good defense going up against the Bears. So, along those lines, you want easy playoff matchups that will be competitive. Um, and what I mean by that is you want those easy games. You want to play that St. Louis defense. You want to play the New Orleans defense. Those are dream matchups. And then on top of that, I mean, this is pretty precise, but I like to pick teams that I think are going to be competitive during those games. And this is just one of the factors that goes into my thinking. But I like to pick teams that I think like won't blow everybody away, like the Colts. Like the Colts in Week 15, that's a roll of the dice because you don't know if Peyton Manning's going to be sitting out the second half and so forth. So if you can, teams like the Steelers and the Giants and the Cowboys are usually competitive, but they haven't put their guarantee. They haven't had guaranteed their playoff spot yet, so they're still playing for something. So that's just one factor to consider, along with many others such as the strength of schedule, offensive line, and so forth. But that's just one thing I keep in mind. Also, remember, fantasy experts are constantly wrong. Last season, everybody seemingly missed the boat on Randy Moss and Jamal Lewis, and myself is I'm no different. You know, um, all the big sites, I mean, almost all of the big sites missed this. Certainly nobody saw Randy Moss going anything above 15 touchdowns. Um, and then Jamal Lewis with a very solid year for a running back in a year when running backs went askew. Um, these players just show that the fantasy experts are constantly wrong. you don't always want to be with the current, because if you're always with the current and what the most people think, then you're never going to be able to break free and you know, have a better football team. Don't always go with the current, because every year the current is wrong about something. Now, this isn't to say that people don't know what they're talking about. They do, but it's, I mean, don't feel bad if you get if you make a reach in the draft, or you know, someone thought you picked too early or something. That's okay, because you know, sometimes you have to think a little bit differently. You don't always want to go by the ADP. You don't always want to go with what the consensus is. And along those lines, if you really believe in a player, don't be afraid to go outside the ADP. If I believe in a player, I'm willing to reach for him, simply because I don't want anybody else to get him. So I'll reach that extra round just to make sure I get my players. Because if you really believe in a player, you don't want to mess around and hope they fall to you at their supposed ADP. You want to go ahead and get them, because if you really think they're going to do good, you want to be built around. You want to build your team around players that you think will perform. That's a lot of the essence of fantasy football, and that's lost in value-based drafting, is where you're just drafting based on who's fallen to you. Well, I mean, I don't like that. I don't ever believe that I should be quote unquote forced to make a pick. That's an opinion of mine, but I think it's worth thinking about. Um, and also, there's no perfect system. Going back to the value-based system, that's a fine system. Such as the football guys draft dominator. That's it's a great you know, it's a great tool, and it gives you a good idea of whose good values where. But you know, a machine will never be able to replace the human, and I think they would agree with that. And values are fine, but it's inherently flawed in that the sense that if everybody uses them, you know, only one person can still win. So there's that, and again, you're going off of other people's rankings, so you know that's never going to be perfect. But anyway, it's a good system. But if you know, if you have more than one person adhering to something similar, it ultimately cannot work. Um, just want to wrap up with a few more things here. Pick players from teams that score a lot. This is something I always do, and I stress to you is, you know, avoid those teams that that are going to struggle scoring. The Bears, I can tell you right now, will have a hard time scoring. The Dolphins are going to have a hard time scoring. You know, they just don't have the offensive talent. So you want to avoid you want to avoid picking players off of teams that are just going to have a hard time scoring. Now, on the other hand, um, you want to pick players off the Patriots, off the Saints, um, the Colts, the Cowboys, because those teams, they get in position to score, and they give their players multiple opportunities to produce fantasy points. You know, as opposed to like someone on players on the Raiders, they rarely get that position because their offense is so bad. Also, avoid potential players. Potential is an ugly term tossed around in fantasy football, and it usually doesn't get fulfilled. I mean, that's something you just have to realize with a potential player is it's it's unlikely. Like, potential is you have is there comes in degrees, and you have to weigh the degree that it's coming in. Sometimes we talk about Randy Moss has the potential to have 20 touchdowns, but you look at his base and it's still 15. That's fine. But when you look at someone like Kevin Smith and you're saying, oh, he has the potential to be a top 10 running back, that's fool's gold, and it's likely not going to happen. And that leads into my final thought is, you know, despite the emergence of Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch last year, the rookie running backs are still a suspect class, as are all rookies. So don't go into your draft picking up a bunch of rookies, or you know, you watch these guys in college, and you think they're gonna it's just gonna flow over to the pros. It doesn't. Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch were the exceptions, and you're better off looking for the rules. Okay, that's gonna do it for this time. Thanks for listening to You Fantasy Football.